I had this client who was a mathematical genius, a clinical client. He taught me a lot of things I didn't know and I hadn't learned as a statistician. And one of the things he talked to me about was the Pareto principle. And so I went and looked into that in some depth. And so I found, for example, that it's such a strange phenomenon. It's like the square root of the number of people operating in a specific discipline produce half the output. That's the law. And so there's 1,000 scientists working on a particular, in a discipline. 30 of them publish half the papers. And you can look across, it's the same with basketball, hoops successfully managed, hockey goals scored, soccer goals scored, records produced, books written, books sold, records sold. It's like everywhere, this law, this weird square root law. Sometimes people sum that up as the 80-20 principle, but it implies, for example, if you have an organization with 10,000 people, 100 of them doing half the work. Now, if you have 10, it's 3, and that's not so bad, but at 10,000, it's 100. And you think, no way. It's like, well, if you meet some of those people who might be in that 100, you might think differently. So, and this looks like there's some fundamental rule, and so imagine one distribution would be talent, and so you need to be in, say, the top 10%, but that's not enough. You also need, I don't know, you need to be in the top 10% of education, say, to be a successful research scientist. And the juxtaposition of those two curves produces a real fractional percentage, and those people are hyper qualified for that particular enterprise. The smaller the game, the less the game at the top, but we expand the games continually with technology, and recording is an excellent example of that. And so I guess what we hope is that we produce enough new games so that everybody can win at something, but we're still funneling a tremendous number of resources to people at the top of whatever the game is, especially as these games become big. So, yes. And you see that well, it's really obvious with money, and people complain continually about the top 1%. But the problem is that there's a book called Big Science, Little Science that was written in about 1962, and the author escapes me at the moment, but he did exactly the same sort of analysis for the scientific literature. It's exactly the same story. So, hyper-dominance of a tiny minority of people, and so there's a natural, it's something like positive feedback loops too, isn't it? Because, and I've noticed this as I've become more famous, I suppose, is that you get known and so more people know you, and so more people are likely to attend to you, and then more people are willing to talk to you because you have an audience, and so that drives the expansion of the audience, and your connection network grows at the same time, and you have more resources, and so it's a bunch of positive feedback loops moving upward. So I know there's this native Canadian tribe on the west coast, Haida. The Kwakwaka'wakws did the same thing. You know, in their societies, they'd have big chiefs, and the big chiefs would just accrue everything. And then now and then they'd have a potlatch and give it all away. And then their status was dependent on their ability to give a lot away. And that stabilized their society. Now, those were made illegal by the Canadian government. But I do believe that was one of their so-called evolved solutions to the terrible problem of inequality, the fact that, you know, goods tend to accrue in the hands of a few. I mean, I studied entrepreneurial success as a researcher for quite a long time too, because one of the personality factors that predict entrepreneurial ability is this trait openness, which is essentially creativity. And what defines creative thinkers in part is, so here's a simple creativity test, and it actually is reasonably predictive of creative capacity, both in terms of originality of thought and creative productions as assessed by experts. How many uses can you think of for a brick in 3 minutes? You got to write them down. Or even, how many 4-letter words can you think of in a minute that start with C? That'll be correlated at about 0.3 or 4 with your creativity, depending on how it's measured. Very simple test. And what seems to happen is that creative people, when they think of one idea, the probability that will trigger an associated idea is higher, especially a distally associated idea. So that likely means that creative people have more erroneous ideas as well. And then they have to, you know, what would you say, edit them and select. But one of the things that makes creative entrepreneurs successful is that they produce a large variety of creative products, and then they throw them out in the marketplace, and most of them fail, but you just need one to hit that Pareto point, and then you're successful. So you throw, you throw what do you do? Throw a mess at the wall and see what sticks, essentially. And most entrepreneurs, before they're successful, have had a very large number of failures. Because even if you're intelligent and creative, the probability that you'll build a product that's actually timed for the market is extremely low. So, well, what do? Well, you create more, and that's what happens. That's what creative people are essentially biologically predisposed to do. So I think that principle, that underlying principle of positive feedback loops and, the combination of scarcity of ability and resources, I think it accounts for all those inequalities. So, the question is, what do we do about that? Partly we've tried to solve that, so to speak, we in the West, by trying to ensure something like equality of opportunity across a wide range of games. That's not a bad sort of meta solution, right? It's like, well, we can't predict. We know that there's going to be wild disparities in outcome, and we can't really do anything about that. But maybe we can give people something approximating an equal shot at winning some game. And that would be better for everyone too, because then we can harness their creative resources. And it isn't obvious to me that there is a better solution. Technically even, I can't see, I don't understand. I don't know what a better solution could be.
How much more do you have than most people have? You need to make $30,000 a year to be in the top 1% of the socioeconomic distribution worldwide. You always hear about the 1%, right? Of the evil 1%. And they churn, by the way, because it's not the same people all the time. And by historical standards, you're doing a hell of a lot better than the top 1%, I can tell you that. I read a nice article by a coalition called Human Progress the other day, and they were comparing the typical middle-class person who lives now with Rockefellers in the 1919s. Say, well, would you rather be a middle-class person now or Nelson Rockefeller in 1919? And the answer seemed pretty damn clear that, well, if you were Nelson Rockefeller, then you would have been richer than anyone else. And there's something to be said for that status, right? Because people do like to have more than others. I don't know if it's a good thing or not, but it is one of the things that we like. And so you'd have that, you'd be richer than everyone else. But there'd be all sorts of things that you have that Nelson Rockefeller wouldn't have had a hope of purchasing.
Well, I think it depends to some degree on each individual. You can find status and meaning in your family. You have your pursuits outside of your work. I'm not saying that money isn't a good singular marker of relative status. It's probably the best singular marker there is, but it's not the only one, right? There are diverse places where you can attain status. And so, you can be poor and dignified. You've certainly met people like that. You can be poor and admired within your family. You can be poor and of decent or outstanding character, for that matter. And so, that's not exactly a domain that's regulated socially like the economic domain, but it's not nothing. And by the same token, you can sacrifice a lot of those things to economic pursuit, and then you'll have lots of money, but man, your life sucks in 50 different ways. So I don't know if that's a sufficient solution, but it's not nothing.